Ellie and Eddie return home to more mystery. A college student's summer job allows her garden to grow in ways she didn't expect. A young man's escape from the dog days of summer sends him even further away. Welcome to Hidden Oaks.
The stars are out. I guess I'm not sure what I was expecting. We must have been in there for...
A lifetime. A useless, wasted lifetime.
How can you say that?
How can you not? He died, Ellie. He died fumbling around with all this nonsense, this stuff he supposedly hated so much but always had so much more time for than he did for us. Ow!
Your hands. We should go to...
They'll be fine. Let's just go home. I mean, you know what I mean. Ow! Here, the keys are in my pocket. He did say you could drive home, didn't he?
Good to know you're listening to something he said.
I'm sorry. I know you two somehow didn't hate each other, and I take it back about his life being wasted.
Thanks, I guess.
For starters, we're finally done with all this bullshit. What?
Done? What about any of this feels done to you?
Oh, I don't know. All of it? Come on. Look, even I loved him in my own stupid way. I didn't want him dead. But think of this like his gift to us. We can move on. Get away from all this.
Runaway, you mean?
Come on. Don't start with that.
You know, you sound just like him. Complaining every step of the way instead of appreciating what we have. This isn't a curse to run away from. This is something special. We walked over a bridge made of nothing. We opened up the ground. We watched water and fire live.
And then...
Yeah, I know. That didn't exactly go well. But we still have each other. And we still have a job to do. We need to be in this together. We need to figure this out.
Why are all the lights on in Dad's house?
That is a very good question. I don't remember having any of them on this morning. Although, the garage door? We did leave that open, didn't we?
I think so. Go on. We can pull in.
Okay. I don't know. This doesn't seem right.
We still don't know how long we were down there. Was that even this morning?
Another good question. This is creeping me out.
You wanted us to be a team. Me asking stuff, you not knowing. This could work.
Come on. This isn't funny. What do we do?
I mean, it's a little funny. We're gonna have to go in sometime, right?
I guess so. But leave the garage door open still. If anyone's here and wants to leave, we don't want to stop them.
Ellie, the garage door isn't open.
What do you mean? Oh. It's gone? How is it gone?
Hell if I know. Hey, look. We do make a good team. Come on, let's get inside.
Everything seems to be in place.
Not sure how you can tell that, but okay.
Did you hear something?
Pretty sure that was me, sorry. Come on, nobody's in here. This is our light at the end of the tunnel, right? None of the rest of it made any sense. What's a few lights left on after all that?
Something feels strange.
How are you the scared one right now after... Come on, we'll go through and turn all the lights out.
You're right. You don't feel like there's anyone here. You know what I mean, right?
I do know, and no, there's nobody.
Are you sure?
Hey, is anybody here?
What are you doing?
You should know not to mess with us. We've got a big heavy backpack thing and we know how to use it. I mean, we don't, but there's a lot of weird crap in it. Yeah, we got a jar of rusty nails. We'll We'll poke you and give you tetanus. Huh? And some glowing rocks. We'll throw them at you and give you skin cancer. And I think there was some weird mirror thing. We'll use it to point out all your skin blemishes and show you how big your pores are. So you better leave us alone.
All right. Oh, okay. I admit I needed that. He's really gone.
Yeah.
None of this feels real. There's so much we don't understand.
Hey, weird question. Are you hungry?
I can't even tell.
I think in Dad's honor, I'll heat up some of those Hot Pockets.
Yeah, that actually sounds fitting. Gross, but fitting. What is it now?
Maybe you'd better see this. We just came through here, right? And a moment ago, the kitchen was not covered in cobwebs?
Do you still think we're done?
I think maybe I'm not hungry after all.
Eddie?
Definitely not hungry.
The study.
What?
We have to get to the study. The book. The rest of the things.
Slow down. What are you... Oh shit, they're everywhere.
Hurry!
Where did all this come from? What the hell is...
No.
What is it? What? Whoa.
It's all gone.
Shit.
Maybe you're right.
Me? Well, that'd be a first. What about?
Maybe we're done. This is over. He's gone. Everything's gone.
Do you smell that?
It's over, isn't it?
The stinky book. It was right here.
The book! How?
I don't know. I just reached for it, and here it is.
Look, the rest of the room.
Everything's here. Is this everything?
I don't know. I think so.
Here, you should take this.
No, don't let go of it. What if this is a father and son thing? What if you're the heir to that book? What if any of this only works in your hands?
That is insane. You and I both know whatever any of this stuff is, I'd be as pitiful with it as he was. This is all you, Ellie. You're it now, and I'll prove it. Catch.
Don't!
See?
No more spider webs. How did you know that would work?
I didn't. I don't have any idea how this crap works. That was the only help you need from me. Getting this stuff out of my hands and into yours.
Eddie.
That said, I mean, if you really want me to stick around.
Thank you.
So, where do we start? Miss Heir to the big book of nasty smells.
Up there. The puzzle box, highest up.
This?
Can you open it?
Sure, I think. I don't recognize this one. What made you... Huh. It's like the amber from Jurassic Park, but with no mosquito. So I guess just amber.
That's what he forgot.
Come again?
It wasn't our fault. Just like he said. He didn't remember he needed this.
Dad? Down in the pit? Wait, so that's...
This is how we handle the living fire.
May. Kelly arrived at her uncle's place in New Brighton, Minnesota in late May. Her freshman year of college at UT Austin had been a whirlwind. She had managed to survive and even thrive at times, with a 3.7 GPA, just eking out an A- in her second semester of chemistry and staying comfortably in the range of the honors list. Now she was ready for a summer that was a little less mentally taxing. She had opted to come to Minnesota for a summer gig she had landed after searching for something challenging and lucrative. A knife manufacturer called Cutcore was recruiting sales associates to make direct sales across the country. She had scoffed at the name, as hokey as it was, but became interested after reading that junior associates could earn $600 or more a week. She had found the glossy brochure in the Student Job Center on campus. Quotes from bright-eyed college students within suggested the most driven junior associates could pull in $1,000, and that earnings could grow in subsequent years. After 9 months of incurring college debt, Kelly realized how helpful a boost like this could be. She had decided on the Twin Cities area as a base of operations because going home to her mom's place in Des Moines felt stale, and she shuddered to think of spending a summer with her high school friends. Her family had visited her Uncle Martin and his wife Cindy every summer as a kid, as part of their annual family road trip, and Kelly had pleasant memories of days spent on their suburban lawn and walks back and forth to the local park while her parents visited at the ranch-style home. Her uncle had made a small fortune investing in technology and internet companies over the decades, but had lived humbly. He had bought an RV a year ago after his wife's passing from pancreatic cancer. The first few months after she died, he took a cross-country trip with his dog Maggie. Kelly assumed this was to try and heal from the emotional trauma of what had been a precipitous diagnosis and decline in Cindy's health the winter before. When she had casually mentioned her plans for the summer over their Christmas gathering in Iowa, he said that he'd be road tripping again this year and would need someone to watch his place and keep it up while he was gone. She was welcome to stay over the break in school in exchange for basic housekeeping, like watering the plants and mowing the lawn. She took this as a sign and began the surprisingly easy process of applying to Cutcore. Kelly submitted the one-page application in February and had a 10-minute phone interview with the regional manager Greg, who sounded only a few years older than her. 1 week and a $30 deposit later, a sales kit arrived in the mail. This included a set of knives she could use herself and show off to would-be customers, as well as a book titled The Finest Grit, the cutting-edge technique of mobile knife sales. It seemed the Cutcore business model involved as many puns as possible. And now here she was, showing up in town on Friday evening, just a few days after the end of classes and a week after her uncle had left town with Maggie, ready to start selling her knives. She had walked into the home with its fading yellow siding, shuffled across the brown shag carpet of the living room, and plopped her bag down in the same bedroom she had stayed in as a kid. She took a deep breath through her nose to smell the scent of a homey place she hadn't been to in years. Kelly slept well that night and awoke early and well-rested. She had already read The Finest Grit 2 times and read it once more this morning for good measure. She was intimately familiar with the best-selling knife set, from the Shogun's chef's knife that could cut cans and tomatoes down to the Lil Buddy paring knife that kept an edge despite daily use on a granite countertop. It was all laid out in the text. Having run out of reading material and with no friends or other family in Minnesota, she found herself a bit bored on Saturday. Late in the cool morning, she stared blankly out the window. As she tied back her curly brown hair, her gaze fell on 3 raised plant beds in the backyard behind the garage. Uncle Martin must have put them in sometime over the 4 years since her family last took a trip to Minnesota. The dirt looked loamy, and there were weeds just beginning to poke up from each patch. Still in her pajamas, she wandered out to the beds, her slender frame bending over the soil, and plucked a few of the scraggly pests. They came up surprisingly easily. She went from bed to bed and had the whole lot cleaned up in under 30 minutes. Kelly had never grown anything other than houseplants before, but she had seen her mother garden all through childhood and figured it couldn't be too hard. She headed to the front and punched in the garage code. 1953, her Aunt Cindy's birth year. Then dug through the yard implements until she found a shovel. She plunged the shovel into each bed and loosened up the dirt, then plopped down on the lawn in the shade. Her mind filled with visions of cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers. She couldn't have done anything quite like this back in Austin. A short time later, after a trip to the hardware store, she had a mix of plant seeds and starts. Beside those veggies that had excited her to garden, she put in a combination of seed potatoes, green beans, climbing peas, and a wildflower mix. She felt great about the coming summer. June. Selling knives door to door didn't come easily to Kelly. Her manager Greg paired her with a shy, nervous woman named Nina. She guessed this was for both of their safety and to give some confidence to one or both of the salespeople, but she felt like Nina was out of her element and only served as a hindrance to Kelly's dreams of summertime riches. Kelly was nervous too, but after a first day of rejection at 19 out of every 20 homes, she was feeling each rejection less personally. 3 more days in and she was hitting her stride on her pitch. Nina, meanwhile, started hanging back more each day, saying less and less and fidgeting with her hands while Kelly did all the work. When the tallies came in and Greg went over their earnings on a phone conference in her uncle's living room, the take-home pay came to a pitiful $200 each. This was far less than Kelly expected, but she knew this was a new realm for her and had been told to expect as much for her first few weeks from Greg. Greg told them he knew they were just getting started and encouraged them to stay out an hour longer each night the next week. Nina dropped out halfway through week 2. She mumbled something about the pace and not being able to make her rent if this was how their pay was going to go. In the end, she said she'd be packing up and heading back home to work her old high school job in Maine. Kelly didn't miss her. She felt safe enough working the suburbs surrounding the cities with at least one day of work each week in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and this only meant more earnings for her. When Greg called her that night, he said it wasn't company policy to let associates sell alone and asked her to bear with him while he found a replacement. Kelly secretly prayed he never would. With Nina gone and dollar signs dancing around in Kelly's mind, she started working Saturdays when all the potential customers would be home and off guard after a week of work. She would come home tired but satisfied every evening with enough time to make a simple dinner like mac and cheese. She would then turn her attention to the garden. She loved the garden with its flush of verdant green, punctuated by some of its early blooming wildflowers. She would spray it down with a good soaking sometime after 7, and the tang of young tomato leaves would catch her nose. The aroma reminded her of her childhood spent wandering her mom's garden, a relative forest to her as a little one. Her mom, who she spoke to rarely and in pretty short conversations, suggested she water in the evening to avoid something called leaf scorch. It felt like voodoo to her and elicited an eye roll, but it made sense anyway to make sure the water stayed in the soil instead of evaporating. After the watering ritual came the weeding. She bought a knee saver so she could kneel and pull weeds for a good 20 to 30 minutes every evening. She didn't use gloves, and the green of the weeds would stain her palms. The seedlings had shot up and were looking sturdy and leafy. As the daylight faded, she would stand at the kitchen window in the back and admire her work. These boxes of soil with their tufts of green poking up. She would go to bed feeling tired, accomplished, satisfied. July. Through some grit and determination, Kelly managed to drive her weekly take-home pay above $500. She had taken to working Sundays, but waited to head out until everyone got home from church. As a bonus, she sometimes interrupted after-church brunch and had the attention of even more customers. She'd begun to think of her buyers as chumps, willing to buy knives that she had lost faith in. The gimmicks she used to sell her knives felt blatantly fake and borderline dishonest. Weekly, Greg had taken to sending her a new Shogun to cut cans with and a new Lil Buddy to rough up with sandpaper. Can't these people see what a scam this is, she thought to herself. Yet week by week, her summer sales climbed. The July heat wore on her nearly as much as her unwitting clients. She tended to sweat heavily since childhood, and spending 10 to 12 hours a day hoofing around the Twin City suburbs left her guzzling water and slipping into the occasional movie theater lobby for a blast of cold air. Things worsened toward the end of the month, when the heat blasted from beach weather warm to the near-fatal 100s, with the heat index often in the 1-teens. She had no idea it could ever get so hot in a state known for its snowstorms and love of hockey. She guessed she must have always visited outside of season for ungodly heat. As she was turning her time into hard-earned money, the garden began to suffer. Her sales were taking her farther and farther from her northerly second-ring suburb, and she often got home after dark. Dinner tended to be a Stouffer's frozen dinner or pizza rolls chased with a Mountain Dew. The pre-bed caffeine seemed to have no effect on her exhausted body. She remembered to water the garden only about 3 out of every 7 days, and the plants were beginning to look spindly. The drooping of the tomatoes' leaves tended to be her only reminder to spray the plants, and she missed that if she got home after dark. The fragile pea plants had already completely withered. One day late in July, she had inspected the plants before she went to her car and noticed scads of yellow and black beetles with orange bellies covering the potato leaves, chewing their way across the foliage and adventuring some nibbles of the nearby greens. Their orange eggs covered the leaves like caviar, and her lip curled in revulsion. She walked to her car while mulling over the slow demise of her garden. After 14 hours selling knives, the wilting mess had left her mind. She plopped down on the couch with her uncle's air conditioner blasting cool air and fell asleep, still cradling a small box of chicken nuggets. August. The heat had abated some, but Kelly worked as hard as ever. By mid-August, her weekly paychecks were topping $700. She celebrated the achievement by treating herself to the tour of Italy at Olive Garden, the only restaurant within miles that was open past 9 p.m. on a Monday night when her check cleared. The waiter was about her age, and she ordered a glass of the house red using the confidence and charisma of a woman who had spent nearly 3 months selling subpar knives door to door. The waiter nodded without a pause and brought the glass out a short time later. She sighed, reflecting on the summer. It was nothing like any summer in high school. The ones spent having fun with friends, eating soft serve at the ice cream stand where she worked and lounging by the community pool on her days off. She was burned out with weeks of sales still to go and would be lucky to clear an average of $600 a week for the whole gambit. She may have learned something about sales and the human psyche, but she felt like she had lost a bit of her own sanity. The mind-numbing repetitiveness of her pitch and the days that blurred into weeks had left her without any sense of herself anymore. She picked at her food, then took some tentative bites of her chicken parmigiana, and found that she wasn't really hungry. She wondered if she was losing weight. Her waiter boxed up the bulk of her meal, and she drove home. The summer had been dry, and the grass crunched under her feet as she walked from the garage to the front door. By the light of the neighbor's backyard floodlight, she could just see the contours of her raised bed garden, whatever the word garden even meant anymore. She walked over to the plants and saw devastation. The bean plants were now as brown and crispy as the peas. The peppers were limp and flat on the ground, as were the tomatoes. A rabbit had fled when she approached, and she saw it had been gnawing on some green tomatoes that were just beginning to rot. The potatoes seemed to have been the last to go, the stems nearly stripped of leaves and just losing their structure. She grabbed a potato vine by the base and gently pulled it up. The roots released easily, and she shook the dried dirt clods off. The potatoes attached to the root system were desiccated and covered in eyes, not edible at all by human standards. She dropped the plant and her shoulders slumped. Had this summer amounted to anything? It felt like so much time spent just trying to stay afloat financially, and she felt like she had sold her soul and summer to Cutcore for so little in return. She shuffled back to the front of the house and went inside. The answering machine light was blinking, and she pressed play as she turned the lights on. It was Greg, congratulating her on breaking the top 100 salespeople in the region. He hinted that big things could lay in store for her, maybe even her own regional manager position next summer. He prattled on longer, but she stopped listening and punched the delete button. She put her leftovers in the fridge and marched to the bedroom, only to pass out in her day clothes and sleep a dreamless sleep. The end of August had come quickly. The weeks had gone by on autopilot for Kelly. Work, sleep, again and again. She ate when she could, mostly gas station crap from around the cities, plus the garbage on the food rollers at the Sunex down the street. Dinners were still just fast food and frozen meatloaf. Despite the unhealthy diet, Kelly could see she was losing weight. Her ribs stood out, and she had lost any she had gained in college and then some. She felt like a zombie. She got through the last week of sales only by going as numb as possible and remembering that her second year of college was beginning in a week. Her smile felt more predatory than friendly when dupes would answer the door, and more than ever before, every sale became a number to add to her tally. On the short jaunts between neighborhoods, she would do the mental tally for her take-home on her last paychecks. Her last sales day was Thursday, to give her ample time to move back to Austin and into the West Campus apartment she and her freshman roommate had picked out in the spring. She finished early, around 8, then came home and ordered pizza. She pulled out the remaining celebratory beers from her uncle's fridge and sipped as she ate pizza and stared at the television, not really processing what she was watching. She felt more blank still than she had all summer and felt like she wanted to cry, but didn't have the energy to make it happen. As had become standard for her, she fell asleep in front of the TV with it still blaring the evening news. She awoke to the sound of a tone that abraded her ear and slowly opened her eyes to see the Care 11 test pattern running. She didn't remember seeing a test pattern on other nights she had fallen asleep, or even in years, for that matter. Still, there it was. She shut off the TV with the remote, and the sound of rain caught her ears. It seemed so foreign after so little rain all summer, and it brought a small smile to her face. She stood to bring her half-empty warm can of beer and her pizza leftovers to the fridge, making her way by the light of the nearly full moon. But why was the moon shining when it was pouring out? After leaving the pizza in the fridge and depositing the can in the recycling, she stood in front of the sink, looking out at the backyard. Then she blinked, and blinked again. The garden beds were covered in silhouettes that looked like the plants she had dreamed of growing all summer. She walked over to the sliding door and pushed it open. Her ears told her the rain was coming down harder than she had thought, and her eyes slowly adjusted to the moonlit backyard. She peered up to see a round, bright yellow orb, but inexplicably saw it crowded on all sides by clouds which never seemed to obscure it. Occasional glows of light emanated from the clouds, and slow thunder rolled to her ears. Now that her eyes had started to adjust, the grass had grown up inches in just a few hours. It blew in waves in the rain that looked like the ripples wind made across a pond or lake. She was shocked, since she hadn't had to mow in a couple weeks. The far wooden fence separating her uncle's backyard from the neighbors was grown over with a new plant, some kind of ivy which seemed, even from her vantage point, to have some bright coloration. She grabbed the flashlight sitting on the kitchen counter near the sliding door and stepped outside, unbothered by the falling rain. With the flashlight on, she saw the new ivy was a vivid red, like the kind she saw in the fall on the side of some of the Austin campus buildings. She cast her light over to the garden beds and gasped. The flowers were the first to catch her eye. She had seen nothing like them before, either in the U.S. or on any nature show she'd seen about overseas countries. Large blooms like black-eyed Susans loomed over the garden, but with cones the size of dinner plates and fuchsia petals as long as her hand. She stood still, despite the wind blowing around her. As she walked closer, the mass of greenery became more distinct. There were tiny clusters of delicate blue flowers that emitted glowing pollen that continued to glow brightly as it left the beam of her flashlight. This too seemed to float of its own accord, unaffected by the rainy winds. On the ground beyond the bounds of the raised beds were perfectly round orbs that she guessed were melons, though they had no stripes or coloration other than being perfectly cherry red, like the shade she had hoped her tomatoes would turn out to be. She was mesmerized by these lovely fruit and didn't pause to notice that the tatters of her old garden were gone completely. As she approached the melons, she extended an index finger and gently prodded one. Her finger met a supple, ripe resistance. She pushed a little harder and broke through. Purple melon pulp gushed out, and she cupped her hand to catch some. It was as cold as mountain river water, so much colder than the air had been all summer, and she intuitively raised the pulp to her lips. The taste was indescribable as a flavor, but was exquisite and reminded her of every summer of childhood and all those things she had missed this year. For the first time in months, she smiled fully and honestly. She trained the light back on the mass of plants in the bed of melons and noticed an iridescent shine coming from several flowers. As she passed the light back and forth to get a better angle, she realized that she was seeing eyes. Many single eyes that were each set within a corona of petals. Each eye flower's petals were a different dark hue, blue, green, yellow. But all of them seemed to have a vein of scarlet running through each petal. Each eye moved with her and regarded her with slow movements. The reflection of each in her flashlight matched its petals' colors. In the midst of these eyes was a single plump fruit on top of a long, thick stalk. This one was the size of a large tomato, though even in the glare of the flashlight it lacked any definitive color. The surface seemed to be made of a shimmering metallic liquid that swirled and changed from light silver to gold to a blaze orange, never losing its mercurial shininess. Again, with an intuition from the very core of her mind, she reached out to this fruit to feel it, to pluck it from its stem. Again, she felt the plump give of a perfectly ripe peach, and again she felt the coolness of a mountain stream. As she tried to retrieve the shimmering globe, she found it was stuck to the stalk, and her hand was stuck to it. The same icy cold that felt so refreshing when she drank from the melon began to sting her hand and then envelop it. She watched, appalled, as the sheen slowly crawled around and up her hand. She felt refreshing cool turn into winter steel as her hand's nerves screamed out at her. The goop climbed her arm and her vision intensified for a moment, then faded to its dim baseline. As it began to spread from her right shoulder to her torso, she thought to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. And then in a flash, she had a vision. Not of her whole life, but of the summer she had spent, wasted really, working a soul-sucking job with the vain hope of making a few more dollars than she would have had back home with her friends, safe in her childhood home. How she wished she could see her mother one last time and to take this terrible mess of a season back. All she could do was softly groan as her body was covered in this strange thing. Her right hand was gone, no longer a part of her. She ceded her body to the cold of the thing as she realized the pain was transient. As it covered her neck, then eyes, and finally her mouth, she gave completely in to the steely chill. Her thoughts ceased, and her vision faded away. Her thoughts ended with only the color of a snow-swept Iowa plain at dusk. By the end of summer, Will was ready for school to start. He wasn't necessarily good at it. He had the uncanny ability to maintain a level of mediocrity that would be unnoticed by his teachers in both positive and negative ways. There were only a few subjects he enjoyed, and he zeroed in on those like a pixelated missile launcher from GoldenEye. The rest of his classes were lucky to survive in the wake of his passion. Still, the start of a school year always had an aura of possibility, like he might become a full-fledged student instead of just floating on the surface of public education. Will tried to escape the doldrums of late August by biking around his neighborhood. His grandparents lived down the road from him, and he'd usually swing by their house for some pizza rolls and to watch their television. They had cable, and he loved to watch Nickelodeon, which would have reruns of Rugrats, Ah, Real Monsters, and Doug playing throughout the day. One of his favorite shows, Salute Your Shorts, would sometimes be on as well. Watching that particular program made him jealous of the kids experiencing summer camp and the adventures they had. That type of life seemed a long way from where he was living. This afternoon, Will decided to skip the 5-block trip to his grandparents and go a little bit further to Moore Lake Plaza. It was the classic type of afternoon for the season. Slow and ambling clouds hanging shadows across the empty driveways and houses. Trees tilting on the breeze, looking so overgrown and lush they almost looked fake, like toys in a train set. Sunlight was caught in beams over asphalt, flickering just enough to mimic a pool of tropical water on some sapphire beach. In the background was the buzz of power lines, cicadas, and the omnipresent 694 freeway echoing engines intermittently from afar. For fun, Will would count the people he'd see at their houses as he biked. The suburbs always seemed empty until the evenings or the weekend, like a vanishing spell was cast across the rooftops from 9 to 5. Next year at this time, Will would be old enough for a job, a prospect he both dreaded and relished. He was looking forward to the independence of having his own money to buy the latest Final Fantasy, but he was also dreading being away from his friends or talking to people. The older he got, the more he realized that growth constantly came at a price, which irritated him. Will was riding a maroon Huffy mountain bike with stars of rust along its handlebars. He'd left it in the rain a few times when heading over to his friend Darius's house. He didn't care if it looked a little eroded. It was more realistic to what he put the bike through. Plus, it upset his father when he didn't take care of his stuff properly. Anger was one of the only honest emotions his dad ever showed, so stroking it with small bits of negligence made him feel noticed and not invisible. Will was wearing black cargo shorts with a tan polo. His curly hair was getting long and tangled, like a bird could settle there to roost. He'd have to get a haircut soon. He hated that. He disliked the mundane statements of people asking, "Hey, did you get a haircut?" Or, "You look different today." Often Will would have whole volatile conversations back and forth in his head during these observations. He just wanted to tell people, "If you noticed I got a fucking haircut, then I got a haircut. Stop fucking pointing it out. Use your goddamn deductive reasoning." On the way to Moore Lake Plaza, Will decided he needed to avoid his grandparents' house. He could still ride by Hidden Oaks, but he needed to take a left or right at some point to bypass their home. He loved his grandparents desperately, but if they saw him ride by without stopping to say hello, they'd throw some guilt his way at the next family dinner over a plate of pot roast and gravy. If he stopped to talk to them preemptively, they would insist he come inside and feed him a ridiculous amount of food to weigh him down, forcing him to stay in the basement playing Warcraft 2. Complete avoidance was his only option. As he glided by Hidden Oaks Park on his bike, something strange happened. He was pedaling along, listening to the hum and occasional crack of his tires pressing over pavement and miscellaneous rocks, when something struck his front wheel, sending him over the handlebars cartoonishly. He managed to roll his body up to absorb the impact, eventually crumpling onto the curb like a frightened pill bug. In the midst of this crash, Will did manage to let out one long and garbled, "What the fuck?" After getting to his feet, he looked for whatever he had hit. Last summer, Will had been biking while talking to his buddy Darius and ran into a parked car. This violent sensation echoed what he'd just experienced, only there was empty air where the collision had occurred. Will stared at his bike, back at the road, back at the bike, and then back at the road. He turned to the woods next to him, which were parallel to the park, church, and playground across the street. He felt for a second the forest was watching him, like a stranger through a bedroom window. Then he got angry, his most common emotion, and shook his arm at the forest. "What the fuck, dude?" he said to the woods. Will knew these trees well enough. Until recently, he used them to hide from bullies. The thought poked a fresh, emotional bruise. He heard that Aubrey's house had burned down. Since then, he had not noticed her around, which was fine by him, until he biked by her old home a while back. The house sat like a charred skull atop a black, scorched hill. It bothered him to look at it. There was something eerie about the air hovering around its soot-etched sides, like he shouldn't be witnessing it. A feeling of profound hopelessness filled his heart as he stared, like the burned-out abode was the very personification of sadness. It was only standing a few more days before a bulldozer plowed it sideways into a crumpled pile. Back on the bike, Will zigzagged between quiet curbs and sidewalks toward Moore Lake Plaza. He crossed streets, waved at people, and slowed down while he went through intersections. He rarely stood up on the pedals as he rode along. He was worried after his earlier crash over empty air. Maybe there was something wrong with his bike. Plus, he was not good at balancing in general, which showed with his shaky legs. Apparently, he was missing some tendons in his legs, but his parents could not remember which ones or how it affected him. He just knew he had a harder time doing things than other people. Moore Lake Plaza was a long L-shaped strip mall with a blue-tiled roof, tinted windows, and a variety of stores, which divided the face of the building into various signs and advertisements. The building was remarkably flat. It was almost like a teal fiberglass eyebrow. There was one exception. A large, empty building closer to its center where Grand Slam used to be located. This rectangle towered upwards like a wizard's keep. Will had a hard time focusing on the building with the sun reflecting off every surface, as well as the heat mounting the concrete. He hadn't noticed the temperature as much until he had arrived. It was not surprising since it was still summer, but the gusts of furnace-like air were certainly worse at the strip mall than on the ride over. Even stranger, the parking lot seemed extra long to bike through, like he was traveling across some sort of mirage or wasteland, with just a few seagulls bothering to occupy the vast space. "I don't remember it being this far," Will said, looking around. There were multiple places Will loved to visit in the strip mall. One was the restaurant Joe DiMaggio's, which his family would go to often. The hobby store on the opposite end of the building had served as a go-to destination for model cars and boats, both of which taxed Will's patience, but sounded good in theory. His favorite spot used to be the Grand Slam, but it was gone, off to another neighborhood where other kids could save their quarters for a round of Killer Instinct, or the batting cage. He could still remember the bass of the arcade speakers thrumming through the neon green carpet and into his toes, vibrating the words, "Combo Breaker." Will's destination today was the Asian grocery store called Ocean Foods, which was sandwiched between Joe DiMaggio's and a nail salon. The sign above the front windows, which were stacked high with bags of rice, were a bright cobalt blue that always glowed with electricity regardless of the time of day. Will walked up to the doors and leaned his bike against the pillar just outside of them. The shade had a sharp, stone-smelling coolness to it. As he opened the door, a pair of metal bells with red ribbon clanged above his head. They echoed out into the promenade, and that metallic sound seemed to immediately replicate, like a skipping CD. Will looked behind as if someone was following him, but the trapped strand of noise just repeated again. For a second, it felt like he was walking between a dream and reality. Inside the store, Ocean Foods maximized every inch of space. It was not a very large establishment, just one long corridor of colorful stocked shelves, with a doorway on the right that led to a parallel room of similar scope. The shelves were square, ivory layers pushed against the walls like shy guests at a party. On them was every variety of food that could possibly fit: ramen, rice, noodles, sauces, produce, canned meat and fruit, coconut milk, curry paste, sardines, anchovies, jellies, candy, and verdant bamboo plants were just a few of those items. At the very end of this vibrant tunnel of bright packaging was a glass desk with a single register atop it. Behind the checkout was a single door with some shelves. The air smelled like lavender. A radio somewhere played cool jazz. It mixed in with the refrigerators and coolers humming. "Hello, William," a voice said from somewhere in the back. It was Mrs. Lee. She was the store's owner. She inherited the shop from an uncle who had moved back to Thailand. She herself was an accomplished piano player and teacher, hoping to retire to Canada with her husband in the next few years. She would sell the store once she got tired of it, which happened immediately after her uncle had called her about it. Customer service was not a natural fit for her personality, but she didn't mind Will stopping by 2 or 3 times a week. "Your gum is on the counter, William. Take your time, as always," she said. Will smiled and started to make his way to the other room of the store. Ocean Foods was Will's escape from the dullness of the suburbs. He loved everything about it. The vibrancy of the food, the diversity of language and design, and even the glow of the fluorescent light across the tiled floor. It felt like he was stepping into a different world, one so much more alive than his own. His snapshot into a different culture made him excited to experience life. Will usually bought gum from Mrs. Lee. There was a variety pack from Japan with orange, lime, grape, and a few other flavors. They came in small boxes which were wrapped in cellophane with a red thread running through it. Occasionally, he'd buy a bottle of Orbits with gelatinous pearls of orange floating inside of it. This was the only store that still carried any because people could not stand the slimy consistency. His friends thought it was like drinking a lava lamp. He didn't mind it, and he knew it was on borrowed time. As he went to reach for his beverage in a refrigerator in the middle of the room, a strange sound filled the store. It was like music but shallower, as if it was there but did not want to be heard. The room started to stretch out ahead of him as he tried to find the sound. His breathing quickened and he started to sweat, even though the temperature in the store was ridiculously cold. The building continued to grow until the shelves looked so distorted it was like looking into a tunnel of mirrors. Will could now see himself, sweaty and shaking. He looked away from the image. Normally, on this side of Ocean Foods, there was a small deli counter with live catfish just beneath it, swimming endlessly in a round tank. Instead, there were more reflections of himself. He started to panic. I'm all over the place, Will said. He started to run wildly, but he did not seem to move at all. He panted and squealed, too afraid to lift his head to see the endless tiles of reality mimicking him. Come on, go away, he said. He looked up finally and saw that according to the reflection he was running sideways but vertically in place on the floor. He screamed and stopped. There was a laughing hiss somewhere and the ground shook. Everything okay? Miss Lee said from somewhere. Will caught his breath and tried to relax. Yeah, I'm good. All good here, he said, watching his sweat dripping onto the floor. Will took a few moments to recover from what happened. He couldn't explain it, but it felt familiar. Despite being severely unnerved, Will wanted to get some Pocky before he left, and started to walk further down the hallway to where a row of glittering crimson boxes were stacked. He stopped as he reached for it. There was something wet, dripping on his head. He gazed upwards to find raindrops pelting his face and eyes. There was a gray, uneven sky above him with strands of dark clouds billowing like smoke. Tendrils of lightning sizzled into themselves with bony trails of snapping light. Thunder trailed their sparks in a hollow drum roll, shaking his ribcage. Will could not comprehend what was around him. He was no longer in Ocean Foods, but an alley in another country. There were an oily mix of street lights and illuminated signs of kanji which hovered just above his shoulders. The air smelled salty and fried, like he was visiting the state fair. Rooftops were scaled and tiled, dripping with rainfall and staring solemnly into the night. There was a cacophony of cars buzzing, conversations mumbling, and pots boiling. Will took a slight step backwards in shock and was suddenly back in Ocean Foods, reaching out toward the rows of Pocky. What the hell is happening? Will said, patting his hands on his chest to verify his physical existence. His clothes were completely soaked in water. His hair was drenched. He even had some in his mouth that he spit on the floor in a panic. I need to go, he said, grabbing his food and drink and staggering across the floor. His shoes were barely gripping the ground. He was simply hoping Mrs. Lee wouldn't notice the dripping pools following him. As Will passed the fish tank, he stopped. He could hear the music again, the strange melody that wouldn't completely reveal itself to his ears. The catfish were large, whiskered, in a color that was a mixture of green and black. They gazed up at him through crusty circular glass and opened their large mouths pensively, as if they were trying to speak. All around him, the world turned murky and clouded. Suddenly he was floating in a massive expanse of open water like an ocean had filled in all around him. He panicked and started to thrash. The sky was the same violent scene as the previous alleyway. The waves churned over his head, making him feel short and infantile. As one pushed him beneath the surface, he noticed the abyss below his scrambling feet. Pure and limitless darkness, the very definition of the word deep, was looking up at him. He pushed his head to the surface. A line of jade fins was coming toward him, unhindered by the froth and bending layers. Judging by their length and height, the fish was huge, a leviathan, unlike anything Will had seen on TV during Shark Week. The strength of the creature made the storm look like a puddle. As it closed in on him, he could see its mouth open into a living chasm of red muscle centered around a pink tongue. It was so large he stared through it like a tunnel. Deep in its gullet, as the jaws began to clamp over him, Will could barely see a row of pearl teeth sitting far inside, like a monster within a monster. Will tried to swim away, but the fish clamped onto his arm, pulling him into the oblivion below. "William, what on earth are you doing with my fish?" Mrs. Lee said from behind the deli counter. She was wearing a navy blue apron. Her hair was tied back in a red scrunchie that matched her lipstick. Her glasses were gold-rimmed and thin, and her eyes were wide with puzzlement. Will screamed and tried to pull his hand free of the catfish's body. His whole wrist was inside it. He could feel parts of its throat, soft and slimy, mixing in with his fingers and knuckles. He finally shook it off. The fish dashed to the other side of its tank, plainly feeling completely mystified and somewhat violated. "What are you doing? You've got water everywhere. You're completely soaked. And look at my store," she said. She was too confused to be angry. This was completely out of character for Will. I need to go now," Will said. Oh no, you are not going anywhere until this is cleaned up. I'll get my mop for you," Mrs. Lee said. Will stared at his wrist, puzzled. Wrapped around his skin was a ring of ink with strange symbols on it. The markings sparkled in the fluorescent light. They looked fresh, unblemished, and his skin beneath them looked unirritated. As Will focused on them, he could hear some dry laughter echoing far away, but close enough. The Hidden Oaks podcast is a collaboration between Patrick W. Marsh, Robert Don, and Owen Swerkstrom. The story Inheritance, written by Owen Swerkstrom. The Gardener, by Colin Arnett. Escape, by Patrick W. Marsh. The voice of Hidden Oaks and Eddie, performed by Robert Don. The voice of Ellie, performed by Robin Sand. Original music composed and performed by David Schwartz. Find more of his works at dtschwartz.com. Produced by Robert Don, Owen Swerkstrom, and Patrick W. Marsh. You can find out more online by visiting us at hiddenoakspodcast.com or by finding us on Twitter at Hidden Oaks Pod, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Hidden Oaks Podcast. Hidden Oaks is an Ironfield independent production. Thank you for listening, and until next time.